The year was 1847. The Arizona desert was a cruel, unforgiving place. It was a sun-bleached graveyard that had swallowed more dreams and more lives than anyone could ever tally. Out here, the wind howled like a banshee, and the sun beat down with the force of a blacksmith's hammer, forging the land into something hard and merciless. And on one particular scorching afternoon, a sound cut through that wind. It wasn't the cry of a coyote or the hiss of a rattlesnake. It was a sound that didn't belong here, a sound so small and desperate it could chill a man's blood even under the blistering sun. It was the cry of a child. What kind of monster leaves a 5-year-old girl to die alone in the heart of this wasteland? The answer to that question was buried under a mountain of secrets. Secrets darker and more dangerous than the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Ezra Whitmore felt the cry more than he heard it. He tugged the brim of his weathered hat lower, his eyes squinting at the shimmering heat rising from the rocky earth. His horse, a tough-as-nails mare he called Patience, picked her way through the treacherous terrain with a steady, practiced gait. For 3 days, Ezra had been riding. 3 days of dust and solitude. He was a man running from ghosts, heading toward the brand-new mining town of Copper Ridge. He wasn't just looking for work in the silver mines. He was looking for a place so loud and so busy it might finally drown out the silence that had haunted him for 2 long years. He was cresting a small, sun-cracked hill when the sound came again, clearer this time. A sob, thin and weak. At first he thought it was a wounded animal, a kit fox maybe, but there was something undeniably human in the sound, something that reminded him of a time he tried desperately to forget. "Whoa there, girl," he murmured, pulling gently on Patience's reins. The mare stopped, her ears twitching. The wind swirled, carrying the faint cry one more time. It was coming from a cluster of prickly pear cacti just ahead, a thorny fortress under the cruel sun. Ezra swung himself out of the saddle, his boots crunching on the parched ground. Every instinct he had honed over a lifetime of hard living was screaming at him. He moved slowly, his hand resting near the butt of the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. The desert was full of traps, and sometimes the most innocent sound could be the deadliest lure. He pushed aside a spiny cactus arm, and then he saw her. She was curled into a tiny ball, trying to find shade where there was none. A little girl, no older than 5. Her dark, curly hair was a tangled mess of dust and dried tears. Her simple cotton dress was ripped, and her small, bare feet were scraped and bloody. She was a tiny, discarded doll left to be broken by the wilderness. "Sweet Jesus," Ezra breathed, the words catching in his throat. He rushed to her side, his caution forgotten, replaced by a wave of something fierce and protective. The little girl looked up, and her eyes, the color of new prairie grass, widened with a terror that felt ancient. "Please, mister," she whispered, her voice a fragile rasp, barely more than a breath. "Don't let them take me back." The words hit Ezra like a physical blow. Take her back? From where? He knelt beside her, his heart, which he thought had turned to stone years ago, suddenly cracking open. "Who, little one?" he asked, his voice softer than he'd used in years. "Who were you running from?" But it was too late. The girl's eyes rolled back in her head, and her small body went limp. Dehydration, exhaustion, and pure terror had finally claimed their victory. She had fainted. Ezra scooped her into his arms. He was shocked by how light she was. She felt like a fragile bird, all hollow bones and paper-thin skin. It felt like he was holding a memory, the memory of his own daughter, Mercy, who had been taken from him by scarlet fever 2 years prior, a loss that had also claimed his wife, Ruth, who died of a broken heart soon after. He had thought that part of him was dead and buried, but holding this child, this tiny flicker of life in the midst of so much death, brought it all rushing back with the force of a flash flood. He carried her back to Patience, carefully lifting her onto the saddle before mounting up behind her. He wrapped one arm securely around her small, frail frame. "Hold on, little darling," he murmured into her dusty hair. "We're going to get you some help." As patience carried them toward the distant promise of Copper Ridge, Ezra's mind was a whirlwind. Who would do this? Who would abandon a child in the middle of the Arizona desert? The act was so monstrous, so fundamentally evil, it was hard to comprehend. The little girl stirred in his arms, her head resting against his chest. "Mama!" she whimpered in her sleep, and then she began to cry again, soft, heartbreaking sobs. "Shh, it's all right now," Ezra soothed, his voice a low rumble. "You're safe." Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, clouded with confusion and fear. They said I was cursed," she sobbed, the words tumbling out in a broken whisper. "Papa said I brought the devil's luck." Ezra's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. He had seen the dark side of humanity in his time, but this was a different kind of darkness. This was the kind that preyed on the innocent. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "Evangeline," she whispered. "But Mama called me Evie." "Well, Evie," Ezra said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "My name is Ezra, and I give you my word. You're safe with me. Nobody is ever going to hurt you again." They were getting closer to Copper Ridge now. Ezra could see the faint outline of the town's first buildings against the bruised purple of the mountains. But he also saw something else. Dust clouds, 3 of them rising in the distance, moving fast. 3 riders, pushing their horses hard, coming straight for them. A cold knot of dread formed in Ezra's stomach. There was an urgency to their pursuit that felt wrong. This wasn't a casual ride. This was a hunt. Suddenly, Evie screamed. It was a raw, terrified sound. She tried to scramble down from the horse, her small body rigid with panic. "Papa!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the approaching riders. "Papa's coming!" Ezra held her firmly, his arm a band of steel around her. "Easy there, little one. It's all right." But it wasn't all right. He could feel the terror coming off her in waves. The riders closed the distance, their horses lathered and panting. The man in the lead was thin and wiry, with a cruel, pinched face, a scraggly beard, and eyes as cold and dead as river stones. Behind him, a woman with a mouth set in a permanent scowl rode with a rigid posture. The third rider was a younger man, barely out of his teens, with the same weak chin and shifty eyes as the leader. "That's our girl you got there, mister," the leader shouted, his voice grating and sharp. "We've been looking all over for her." Evie buried her face in Ezra's chest, her small body trembling like a captured bird. "Please don't let them take me," she whispered, her voice so faint only he could hear it. "Please, Mr. Ezra." Ezra looked from the terrified child to the 3 riders. He had spent years as a Texas Ranger before his life fell apart, and his instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with this picture. He took in the details. The woman's dress was clean, pressed even, not the attire of a mother who had been frantically searching the open desert for her lost child. And the men's faces, they weren't filled with relief. They were filled with irritation, annoyance, like they had lost a piece of luggage, not a daughter. "She your daughter?" Ezra asked, his voice perfectly level, betraying none of the cold fury building inside him. "Course she is," the man snapped. He gestured with his thumb to himself. "Name's Jeremiah Blackwood. This here's my wife Prudence and our boy Caleb. The girl, she wandered off this morning. We've been worried sick." Worried sick. The lie was so blatant it was almost insulting. Ezra noticed that not one of them, not Jeremiah, not Prudence, not Caleb, looked at Evie with an ounce of love or concern. They looked at her with a cold, hard resentment. "Funny thing," Ezra said slowly, letting the words hang in the hot, dry air. "I found her a good 15 miles south of here. Near the old canyon pass. That's a long, long way for a little girl to wander on her own. Jeremiah's eyes narrowed into slits. She's always been a runner. Wild as an Apache, this one. Now, you just hand her over, and we'll be on our way. He started to urge his horse forward, but Ezra didn't move. No! Evie cried out, her little hands clutching his shirt with desperate strength. Please, Mr. Ezra, they left me. They rode away and left me there to die. The accusation landed like a physical blow. The air crackled with a new, dangerous tension. Prudence Blackwood's face, already pale, turned the color of ash. The boy, Caleb, looked away, a flicker of guilt or maybe just cowardice in his eyes. Only Jeremiah's expression remained unchanged, a mask of cold fury. The girl's touched in the head, Jeremiah said, his voice a low snarl. Always making up stories. Ain't that right, Prudence? The woman just nodded, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. Come on, Evie. Time to go home, Jeremiah commanded. But Ezra had seen all he needed to see. The raw, undiluted terror in the child's eyes was real. The guilt and deflection from the adults was just as real. These weren't worried parents. They were the monsters who had left her in the desert, and Ezra Whitmore had a long, violent history with monsters. I don't think so, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the chilling weight of absolute, unshakable finality. Jeremiah's hand drifted down, hovering just over the worn leather holster on his hip. Mister, I don't know who you think you are, but that girl belongs to us. We got the papers to prove it. A flicker of unease went through Ezra. Papers could complicate things. Papers could turn this into a legal matter, and he knew how slowly the wheels of justice turned out here. What kind of papers? Ezra asked, his own hand remaining loose, but his body tensing, ready to draw and fire in a single, fluid motion. Marriage certificate, Jeremiah replied, a smug little smile touching his lips. Showing she's my wife's child from her first marriage. Her real pa died in a mine cave-in. We took her in out of Christian charity. Ezra looked down at the little girl clinging to him. Her whole body was shaking in frantic denial. Is that true, little one? Ezra whispered. No, Evie sobbed. My real papa died. Mama married him. After. He said I was bad luck. He said I made the crops fail and the chickens die. He said I was a curse. They drove me out in the desert and they just left me there. The raw, unfiltered honesty of a child is a powerful thing. It cuts through lies like a hot knife through butter. Ezra had listened to countless liars in his day, thieves, killers, cheats. He knew the sound of a lie, and he knew the sound of the truth. Sounds to me, Ezra said, his voice turning as cold as a winter wind. Like you folks need to find yourselves another child to torment. Jeremiah's face contorted into a mask of pure rage. You got no right. She's legally ours. And you got no right to abandon a child to the coyotes and the sun, Ezra shot back, his own anger finally breaking the surface. The way I see it, you forfeited any claim you had on this girl the second you rode away and left her for dead. The standoff stretched, the silence broken only by the wind and Evie's quiet sobs. Caleb fidgeted in his saddle, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. Prudence stared at the ground, refusing to meet Ezra's gaze. But Jeremiah's eyes burned with a wild, fanatic fire. She's cursed, I tell you, he shrieked, his voice cracking. Ever since she came to live with us, nothing but bad luck. The well went dry, the livestock took sick. My wife here got the fever, the girl's got the devil in her. The only devil I see here, Ezra replied, his voice dropping to a deadly calm, is you. Now, you ride on before I decide to take this matter to the sheriff in Copper Ridge. I have a feeling he'd be very interested in your definition of Christian charity. For a heartbeat, Ezra thought Jeremiah would go for his gun. He saw the man's knuckles turn white as he gripped the handle of his pistol. Ezra's body prepared for the motion, for the deafening roar of gunfire and the smell of burnt powder. He would die before he let them take this child. But then Prudence spoke, her voice thin and reedy. "Jeremiah, let's just go. He's not worth the trouble." Caleb chimed in, eager to de-escalate. "Yeah, Pa, the girl's more trouble than she's worth anyway. Always crying and carrying on." Jeremiah's face was a storm of warring emotions, rage, frustration, wounded pride. Finally, it settled into a look of cold, venomous calculation. "Fine," he spat, his eyes locking onto Eve. "Keep the cursed brat, but don't you come crying to us when your life turns to dust and ashes." He yanked his horse's reins, wheeling the animal around so hard it whinnied in protest. He spurred it mercilessly, riding off toward the west, a plume of angry dust in his wake. Prudence and Caleb quickly followed, neither of them daring to look back. Ezra watched them go until they were just small specks disappearing into the vast, shimmering heat. He held Evie, his grip firm and reassuring, until the last trace of them was gone. He could feel the trembling in her small body slowly begin to subside. He looked down at her. The terror was starting to recede from her green eyes, replaced by a fragile, tentative hope. "They're gone now, sweetheart," he said gently. "They can't hurt you anymore." She looked up at him, her face smudged with dirt and tears, and asked a question so simple and so profound, it struck him right in the soul. Are you going to keep me?" she asked in a tiny voice. The question hit him harder than any bullet could have. He hadn't thought that far ahead. His only focus had been on the immediate threat, on protecting her from those monstrous people. He hadn't considered the what now. He was a drifter, a man with no home, no future, nothing but a horse and a past full of ghosts. But as he looked into her wide, hopeful eyes, he saw a flicker of something he thought he'd lost forever, a purpose. "Would you like that?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Evie considered his question with the solemn gravity only a child can possess. Then she nodded. "You're kind, Mr. Ezra," she whispered, burying her face in his shirt again. "And you smell like my real papa did, like leather and tobacco and sunshine." Ezra felt his throat tighten, a memory, sharp and painful, of his own mercy, saying something similar to him once, a lifetime ago. He swallowed hard against the lump forming in his throat. "Well then," he said, his voice a little unsteady, "I reckon we'd better get you cleaned up and fed. You hungry?" "Yes, sir," Evie whispered. "Then let's ride." Copper Ridge wasn't much more than a single dusty main street, a scar of civilization carved into the wilderness. It was flanked by raw timber buildings, a saloon with swinging doors, a sprawling general store, a small white church with a crooked steeple, and a handful of houses. It was a town built on the promise of silver and sustained by grit. Ezra rode straight to the doctor's office, a small shack with a painted sign that read, "Dr. Patterson, Cures and Remedies." Inside, a kindly silver-haired man with spectacles perched on his nose examined Evie with gentle, practiced hands. Dehydrated and exhausted, but no broken bones, Dr. Patterson pronounced, his brow furrowed with concern. Whoever left this child to fend for herself in the desert should be horsewhipped and left for the vultures. He muttered the words as he carefully cleaned and bandaged the cuts on her small feet. "She's lucky you found her when you did," the doctor said, looking at Ezra over his glasses. "Another day out there?" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Both men knew what the desert did to those who were lost in it. While the doctor worked, he asked questions. Ezra gave him the short version of the story, leaving out his own past and focusing on the Blackwoods. He described their cruel faces and their even crueler words. "Blackwood," Dr. Patterson mused, his expression darkening. "I've heard that name. Failures, the lot of them. Tried to farm a plot of cursed land west of here. Nothing grows. They blame everything but their own incompetence. He shook his head. To blame a child, though, that's a special kind of evil. After the doctor's visit, Ezra took Evie to the general store. The place smelled of coffee beans, cured leather, and canvas. A cheerful, bustling woman with a flour-dusted apron emerged from the back. Her name was Martha Henderson. The moment she laid eyes on Evie, clinging to Ezra's leg, her face softened. "Oh, you poor lamb," she cooed, her motherly instincts taking over completely. She knelt down, her voice warm and soothing. "What happened to you?" While Mrs. Henderson fussed over Evie, helping her pick out a simple but clean blue dress and a sturdy pair of shoes, she peppered Ezra with questions. She was the town's unofficial heart, and she made it her business to know everyone else's. "Are you taking her to the orphanage in Phoenix?" she asked, her hands deftly braiding Evie's clean hair. "It's a long, hard journey." "No," Ezra said, the word coming out with more force than he intended. "I'm keeping her." Mrs. Henderson paused, her hands still in Evie's hair. She raised a skeptical eyebrow. "A bachelor? Raising a little girl all on his own? Mister, that's a mighty tall order." "I raised my own daughter," Ezra replied, his voice quiet, the words laced with a pain that was still sharp. "Until she passed." Understanding dawned in the woman's eyes. The skepticism melted away, replaced by a deep maternal sympathy. "I see," she said softly. "Well, if you ever need any help, any advice at all, you just come see Martha. I've raised 6 of my own. I know a thing or two." Her husband, a quiet, wiry man named Henry, emerged from the back room. He glanced at Evie, then at Ezra, and his face seemed to pale. He looked nervous, casting furtive glances toward the street as if expecting trouble. He didn't say a word, just nodded curtly and disappeared back into the storeroom. Ezra filed the strange reaction away. That evening, Ezra rented a room at the boarding house. He sat with Evie at a small table while she ate her first real meal in what must have been days. She ate with a quiet, desperate hunger. She was still jumpy, flinching at loud noises or sudden movements, but a fragile shell of trust was beginning to form around the two of them. She seemed to understand, on some deep primal level, that he was her protector. Later, as he tucked her into a narrow but clean bed, she looked up at him, her green eyes shining in the lantern light. "Mr. Ezra?" she asked. "What is it, little one?" Will you tell me a story?" Ezra smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes for the first time in 2 years. He remembered the countless nights he had sat on the edge of Mercy's bed, spinning tales of brave knights and clever princesses. "What kind of story would you like?" he asked. "A happy one," Evie whispered, her voice already growing drowsy. "With a little girl who finds a new papa, a papa who loves her and keeps her safe forever." His heart clenched. He nodded, his throat too tight to speak for a moment. Then he began. "Once upon a time," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble, "there was a brave little girl who lived in a place where nobody understood how special she was." The next few weeks fell into a fragile routine. Ezra found work at the silver mine, hard labor that left his body aching, but his mind mercifully numb. During the day, Evie stayed with Mrs. Henderson, who was overjoyed to have a child to dote on. Under the woman's patient, loving care, Evie began to bloom. The haunted look in her eyes started to fade, replaced by the natural curiosity of a child. She learned to laugh again, a sound that was like music to Ezra. But the scars of her ordeal were still there, deep and raw. She woke up screaming from nightmares most nights, her small body drenched in sweat, crying for a mother she barely remembered. During the day, she would shadow Ezra, constantly asking if he was coming back from the mine, as if she lived in constant fear that he, too, would abandon her. She'll heal, Dr. Patterson assured Ezra during one of his checkups on the girl. Children are resilient, more than we are, but it will take time, and a world of patience. Ezra had both. Grief had taught him patience, and he was willing to give this little girl all the time in the world. Every evening, he would sit with her and listen. He let her talk about her day with Mrs. Henderson, about the things that scared her, and, slowly, tentatively, about her hopes. "Mrs. Henderson taught me how to make biscuits today," she announced one evening, her face flushed with pride. "Did she now? And how'd they turn out?" Ezra asked, playing along. "A little burned on the bottom," she admitted with a giggle, "but she said that just means they're well done." These moments were precious gems to Ezra. Each one was a sign that the real Evie, the happy little girl who had been buried under layers of fear and trauma, was fighting her way to the surface. But their newfound peace was as fragile as a desert flower, and it was about to be shattered. One afternoon, Ezra returned from the mine, covered in grime and bone-weary, to a scene of chaos at the general store. Mrs. Henderson was in tears, her face streaked with dirt, her apron torn, and Evie was gone. "They took her!" Mrs. Henderson sobbed, grabbing Ezra's arm. "Those awful people, the Blackwoods, they came back!" Ezra's blood ran cold. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "They had some kind of official paper," she cried, her words tumbling over each other. "They had the sheriff with them. Sheriff Brody. He said they had legal custody." Sheriff Brody. The man was known to be in the pocket of the mine's owner, a ruthless tycoon named Silas Croft. He was a man who could be bought. "Where?" Ezra demanded, his voice a low growl. "Where did they take her?" "Back to their homestead, I think," Mrs. Henderson wept. "About 10 miles west of here. Oh, Ezra, she fought so hard. She was screaming your name." Ezra didn't wait to hear more. He didn't say a word. He just turned and ran. He ran to the stable, his mind a red haze of fury. He saddled Patience with frantic, jerky movements and galloped out of town like a man possessed, leaving a cloud of dust and a weeping woman in his wake. He was no longer just Ezra Whitmore, the grieving widower. He was Ezra Whitmore, the former Texas Ranger, and someone had just taken his daughter. The Blackwood homestead was even more pathetic up close. It was a collection of dilapidated shacks surrounded by withered crops and the stench of failure. The place radiated misery. It was the physical manifestation of the Blackwoods' twisted souls. As he reined Patience to a stop, he could hear it. Evie's crying, a desperate, terrified sound coming from inside the main cabin. The sound ignited the cold rage in Ezra's chest into a blazing inferno. His vision blurred for a second. He dismounted, his movements fluid and deadly. The cabin door creaked open, and Jeremiah Blackwood emerged. He was holding a double-barreled shotgun, and there was a smug, triumphant smirk on his face. "I told you to stay away, Whitmore," he sneered. "The law's on my side now. The girl's ours, legally." Behind him, Sheriff Brody stepped out onto the porch, a tin star pinned crookedly to his vest. He was a big, slovenly man with a gut that spilled over his belt. "That's right," Brody said, his voice lazy and corrupt. "This is a family matter. I suggest you mount up and ride out. This town ain't got room for troublemakers." Ezra ignored the sheriff. His eyes were locked on Jeremiah. "Where did you get the papers?" Ezra asked, his voice deceptively calm. Jeremiah's smirk widened. "Judge in Tucson owed me a favor. Turns out, a legal document from a judge carries more weight than the word of some drifter who steals other folks' property." "She's not property," Ezra said, the words like chips of ice. "She's a child." "She's a curse," Jeremiah snarled, "and now she's our curse to bear. So you just ride on and forget you ever laid eyes on her." The crying from inside the house grew louder. "Mr. Ezra! Mr. Ezra, help me!" Evie's voice. It broke something inside him. Any thought of caution, of strategy, vanished. There was only one thing that mattered. "I'm going to give you one chance," Ezra said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was more menacing than any shout. "One chance to do the right thing. Let the girl go, and I'll forget this ever happened." Jeremiah laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Or what, Whitmore? You gonna draw on a lawman? That won't look too good." But Ezra had seen something they hadn't. While they were gloating, a small wisp of smoke had begun to curl from the corner of the dry tinderbox roof of the cabin. A spark from the chimney must have caught. In their haste and their arrogance, they had gotten sloppy. "Your house is on fire," Ezra said simply. Jeremiah and Brody spun around. Their eyes widened in disbelief as they saw the smoke, now thicker, followed by the first flicker of orange flame. "Prudence!" Jeremiah shrieked in a panic. "Prudence, get out here! The house is burning!" The door flew open and the woman scrambled out, coughing and gagging on the smoke. She was dragging a terrified Evie by the arm. In that single moment of chaos, Evie saw her chance. She wrenched her arm free and ran. She ran straight to Ezra, her little legs pumping as fast as they could carry her. "Mr. Ezra!" she sobbed as he swept her up into his arms. "I knew you'd come! I knew you wouldn't leave me!" Chaos erupted. The Blackwoods and the corrupt sheriff scrambled uselessly, trying to save their worthless, burning home. Ezra didn't waste a second. He swung Evie onto Patience's back, vaulted up behind her, and spurred the mare into a full gallop. He rode away from the burning homestead and the shouting men, leaving them to the consequences of their own wickedness. He rode with the most precious thing in the world held tight in his arms. But he knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. A forged paper and a corrupt sheriff meant this went deeper than just 3 miserable failures. Someone else was pulling the strings, and Ezra was going to find out who. Back in the relative safety of Copper Ridge, the reality of their situation crashed down on Ezra. He couldn't stay here. The Blackwoods had a legal document, forged or not. Sheriff Brody was in their pocket. Sooner or later they would come for Evie again, and next time they wouldn't be so easily distracted. They had to run. But where? As he paced the small boarding house room, Evie asleep in the bed, he felt a familiar despair creeping in. He was one man against a corrupt system. Then he remembered the storekeeper, Henry Henderson. He remembered the man's nervous glances, the fear in his eyes. He had recognized something that day. He knew something. Ezra left a note for the sleeping Eve, telling her he'd be back soon, and slipped out into the night. The general store was dark, but a faint light burned in the living quarters upstairs. Ezra knocked softly. After a long moment, the door creaked open. It was Henry, holding a lamp. "Whitmore," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "You shouldn't be here. Brody's looking for you." "I need to know what you know, Henry," Ezra said, his voice low and urgent. "That day in the store, you recognized something about the girl. What was it?" Henry hesitated, licking his dry lips. He glanced back into the darkness of his home. "This is dangerous talk, Ezra. Silas Croft owns this town. The mine, the sheriff, everything. Crossing him is a death sentence." Silas Croft, the name Dr. Patterson had mentioned, the ruthless owner of the mine. "What does Croft have to do with Evie?" Ezra pressed. Henry sighed, a sound of profound weariness. He opened the door wider. "Come in, quickly." Inside, sitting at a small kitchen table, Henry told his story. Years ago, his own son had been a prospector. A good one. He'd found a rich vein of silver, staked a claim, and filed it legally. A week later, he was found at the bottom of a canyon. The sheriff ruled it an accident. Silas Croft bought the claim from the grieving family for pennies on the dollar and became the richest man in the territory. "Croft doesn't find silver, Whitmore," Henry said, his voice trembling with old anger. "He takes it, and he gets rid of anyone who stands in his way." "What does this have to do with Evie?" Ezra asked again. "It wasn't the girl I recognized," Henry said. "It was the locket. The one she was wearing when you brought her in. I only saw it for a second, but I'd seen one like it before. A man came through here last year, a geologist named Thomas. A good man. Quiet. He had a daughter with him, a little girl with dark curls and green eyes. He bought supplies, said he was prospecting up in the canyons. He wore a locket, identical to the one your Evie had. The pieces began to click into place with terrifying speed. This man, Thomas, Ezra said. What happened to him? He disappeared, Henry whispered. Folks said he probably just moved on, but a week later the Blackwoods showed up. They took over a small, failed homestead near the very canyons Thomas was exploring, and they had a little girl with them. It wasn't a curse. It was a cover-up. Evie's father, Thomas, must have found something big, and Croft, or his men, had gotten to him. The Blackwoods weren't just cruel failures. They were hired hands. Their job was to get rid of the only witness, a 5-year-old girl. But why hadn't they just killed her? Ezra looked at Evie, now sleeping peacefully, a small smile on her face. Maybe it was Prudence's squeamishness. Or maybe, just maybe, some small shred of humanity had stopped them from committing the ultimate sin. But now, Ezra knew the truth. Or at least, the beginning of it. This wasn't just about saving a child anymore. This was about avenging her father. The locket, Ezra said suddenly. She doesn't have it anymore. They must have taken it. Evie stirred in her sleep. She began to whimper, caught in a nightmare. Ezra went to her side, gently stroking her hair. It's all right, little one. I'm here. Her eyes fluttered open. The bad man, she whispered, her voice thick with sleep and fear. The man with the snake on his hand. He pushed Papa. A snake on his hand? Ezra asked, his heart pounding. On his wrist, she clarified. A tattoo. He pushed Papa off the big rock, and he took the shiny stone. A tattoo. A specific identifying mark, and a shiny stone. What stone? What did the stone look like, Evie? It glowed, she whispered, her eyes closing again. Even in the dark. Papa said it was our secret, our future. A rock that glowed in the dark. Pitchblende? Uranium ore? Or was it just a child's description of an unusually pure, massive silver nugget? Whatever it was, her father had died for it. And Silas Croft had it now. Ezra knew he couldn't run. Running would mean letting them win. It would mean Thomas's murder went unpunished. He looked at Henry. I'm going back for her locket, and then I'm going to finish this. Henry's face was pale, but a new resolve hardened his eyes. He thought of his own murdered son. The Blackwoods homestead, he said. There's an old storm cellar around the back, hidden under some brush. It leads into their main cabin's pantry. It's a long shot, but it's the only way in without being seen. Ezra nodded. It was time to go hunting. The moon was a silver sliver in the ink-black sky as Ezra approached the Blackwood homestead for the second time. The front of the cabin was a charred, blackened ruin. They had dragged some of their belongings out into the yard, a miserable pile of junk. A single lantern burned in one of the back rooms that had survived the fire. Ezra left Patience hidden in a grove of cottonwoods and circled around, moving like a ghost through the darkness. He found the storm cellar exactly where Henry had said it would be, concealed beneath a pile of dead brush. He lifted the heavy wooden doors as quietly as he could and slipped into the cool, musty darkness below. The cellar smelled of earth and rotting vegetables. He navigated by touch, his fingers brushing against damp stone walls, until he found the wooden ladder leading up. He climbed it slowly, pausing at the top to listen. He could hear voices from the other room. Jeremiah Blackwood and another man. Told you the brat would be trouble, a gravelly voice said. It wasn't Caleb's. It was someone new. Croft is not happy. He wants this cleaned up, permanently. We tried, Jeremiah whined. But that drifter, Whitmore, he showed up. How was I supposed to know he'd be some kind of gunslinger? Croft doesn't pay for excuses, the gravelly voice replied. He pays for results. The girl saw my face. She saw what I did to her father. And now this Whitmore character knows something is wrong. This has to end. Tonight. Ezra peeked through a crack in the pantry door. He saw Jeremiah, Prudence, and Caleb huddled around a table. With them was a large, burly man with a cruel face, and on the back of his right wrist, coiling around his forearm, was the unmistakable tattoo of a rattlesnake. This was him, the man from Evie's nightmare, the murderer. "Where's the locket?" the tattooed man demanded. Prudence scurried over to a small wooden box and pulled it out. "It's here, Mr. Scar, just like you said." Scar. So that's what they called him. He snatched the locket from her hand and pried it open with a knife. Ezra held his breath. "The map is still here," Scar grunted, tracing something on the inside of the locket with his finger. "Untouched. Good. Croft will be pleased about that at least. He wants the claim marker moved before any real lawmen start sniffing around." A map. The locket didn't just contain a memory. It contained the location of Thomas's claim, the claim Croft had murdered him for. "What about the girl?" Prudence asked, her voice trembling. "You'll lead Whitmore and the girl into the canyon pass tomorrow at dawn," Scar commanded. "Tell him you want to make a deal. Once he's there, my men will take care of the rest. An ambush. It'll look like a robbery gone wrong. No witnesses." Ezra had heard enough. Pure, cold fury settled over him. He wasn't just going to get the locket. He was going to deliver a reckoning. He kicked the pantry door open, his Colt already in his hand. The four of them spun around, their faces a mixture of shock and terror. Scar was the first to react, his hand diving for the gun at his hip. He was fast, but Ezra was faster. Ezra's Colt barked once. The bullet hit Scar square in the shoulder he was drawing with. The man screamed and staggered back, his gun clattering to the floor. Jeremiah fumbled for his own pistol, but Ezra was already moving, crossing the room in 2 long strides. He slammed the butt of his revolver into Jeremiah's temple. The man crumpled to the floor like a sack of grain. Prudence shrieked. Caleb looked like he was about to faint. Ezra pointed his gun at the whimpering Caleb. "The locket! Give it to me, now!" Scar, clutching his bleeding shoulder, lunged for his dropped gun with his good hand. Ezra didn't even hesitate. He fired again. The second shot took Scar in the knee. The big man went down, howling in agony. Caleb, sobbing, scrambled to pick up the locket and held it out with a trembling hand. Ezra snatched it. "You tell your boss, Silas Croft," Ezra said, his voice a low, deadly growl, his eyes boring into Prudence, "that I have the map, and I have the witness. If he wants to see either of them again, he can come and get them himself, but he should bring a coffin, a big one." He backed out of the cabin, his gun still trained on the terrified family and their crippled enforcer. He didn't run. He walked deliberately back to his horse, a man who had just declared war. He now held all the cards, the witness, the map, and the truth. But he was still just one man, and Silas Croft was a king in this territory. The war had just begun, and Ezra knew, with a chilling certainty, that it would not end without more bloodshed. He couldn't go back to Copper Ridge. Not now. Croft's men would be swarming the town, and Sheriff Brody would arrest him on sight for the attack on Scar and the Blackwoods. There was only one place to go. The one place Croft would be forced to confront him on his own terms. The claim. Ezra rode like the devil was on his tail, not away from the fight, but straight into the heart of it. He pushed Patience hard through the moonlit canyons, Evie's locket clutched tight in his hand. Inside the small metal heart was a tiny, hand-scratched map showing the location of her father's discovery. It was their only leverage, their only hope. He found the place just as the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of gray and pink. It was a small, sheltered box canyon, easily defensible. In the center of it was a crude, half-finished shack, the one Thomas must have built, and next to it, the entrance to a small, hand-dug mine shaft. This was it, This was the ground where Evie's father had died, and it was the ground Ezra would defend with his life. He knew he needed to get a message out. He was a skilled fighter, but he couldn't hold off an army forever. He scribbled a hasty note, detailing everything: Croft, the murder, the corrupt sheriff, the map in the locket. It was a confession and an accusation all in one. He entrusted the note to a friendly-looking prospector he encountered on the trail, a man heading east toward Phoenix. He gave the man his last $20 gold piece. "Get this to Judge Samuel Morrison," Ezra urged. "Tell him lives depend on it." The prospector, seeing the desperation and honesty in Ezra's eyes, nodded grimly and rode on. It was a long shot, a prayer sent into the wilderness. Now all he could do was wait and prepare. He brought Evie and the Hendersons, who had bravely chosen to flee with him, to the shack. He barricaded the door and windows, creating a small fortress. Henry, his face grim but resolute, checked his old hunting rifle. Mrs. Henderson, her fear hidden behind a mask of fierce determination, tended to Evie, keeping her calm with stories and quiet songs. The waiting was the worst part. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching hoofbeats. Every shadow seemed to hold a killer. They didn't have to wait long. By mid-afternoon, they arrived. Silas Croft's private army. At least a dozen men, led by Sheriff Brody and a seething Jeremiah Blackwood, who was pointing frantically toward the shack. They fanned out, taking up positions along the canyon rim, rifles glinting in the sun. Then, a man on a magnificent black stallion rode to the front. He was dressed in a fine city suit, looking utterly out of place in the rugged canyon. He was older, with a mane of white hair and a face carved from granite. His eyes were cold and utterly devoid of pity. This was Silas Croft. "Whitmore!" Croft's voice boomed across the canyon, rich and powerful. "You have something that belongs to me. Send out the girl and the map, and I'll let you and the shopkeepers live." Ezra opened the shack door just a crack. "The map belongs to the girl, Croft. This is her father's claim, and you murdered him for it." A flicker of annoyance crossed Croft's face. "Thomas was a fool. He stood in the way of progress, just like you are now. Don't make the same mistake." "The only mistake," Ezra shouted back, "was leaving a witness." He slammed the door shut. The siege had begun. The first shots rang out moments later. Bullets thudded into the thick wooden walls of the shack. Ezra, Henry, and Evie huddled on the floor, splinters flying around them. They were trapped, pinned down. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long, bloody shadows across the canyon, their ammunition started to run low. Despair began to set in. Ezra's prayer to the prospector had been just that, a prayer, and it seemed it had gone unanswered. Croft's men grew bolder, creeping closer to the shack under the cover of the fading light. Ezra knew they were getting ready for a final rush. They would be overwhelmed in minutes. He looked at Evie, her face pale with fear, but her eyes fixed on him with unwavering trust. He had promised to keep her safe. It was a promise he was about to break. And then he heard it. A new sound, not the crack of rifles, but the thunder of hoofbeats. A lot of them. Coming fast from the mouth of the canyon. Croft and his men heard it too. They stopped firing, turning in confusion. Riding into the canyon, their silver badges glinting in the last rays of sunlight, were a dozen men. They were hard-faced, clear-eyed, and heavily armed. They moved with the quiet efficiency of professionals. U.S. Marshals. And at their head, riding alongside a tall, stern-looking man in a dusty coat, was Judge Samuel Morrison himself. Ezra's prayer had been answered, but it wasn't the prospector who had delivered it. As the marshals quickly and brutally surrounded Croft's stunned men, another figure emerged from behind them. A woman. She was elegantly dressed, despite the dust of the trail, with silver hair and a face etched with worry and strength. And her eyes, Ezra saw with a jolt, were the exact same shade of prairie green as Evie's. "Mr. Whitmore?" she called out, her voice clear and strong. "My name is Catherine Moorfield. I believe you have my granddaughter." The world seemed to stop spinning. The final pieces of the puzzle slammed into place not with a click, but with a thunderclap. In the aftermath, as Croft and his men, including Sheriff Brody and the Blackwoods, were led away in chains, Catherine Moorfield told her story. She was Margaret's mother, Evie's grandmother. For 3 agonizing years, she had been searching, hiring investigators who followed a cold trail across half the country. Her investigators had discovered that Evie's stepfather, a worthless gambler, had sold his stepdaughter to the Blackwoods for $50 and a bottle of whiskey before disappearing. The trail led them to Arizona, to Copper Ridge. Catherine arrived in Phoenix just days ago and went straight to the territorial courthouse. The judge on duty was her old family friend, Samuel Morrison. When she told him her story, and he cross-referenced it with the wild tale he'd just heard from a breathless prospector, he knew he was looking at a massive conspiracy. He deputized a team of marshals on the spot. Now, in the quiet of the canyon, Catherine knelt before Evie, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my dear," she whispered, her hand gently touching Evie's cheek. "You look just like your mother." Evie, who had faced down monsters and stared death in the face, looked at this stranger with a child's frank curiosity. "Are you my real grandmother?" "I am," Catherine sobbed, "and I've been looking for you for so long." Ezra stood back, his heart a painful mix of relief and a new, sharp anxiety. He had saved her. Justice had been done. But now her family was here. A rich, powerful family from back east. A family that could give her everything he couldn't. Later that evening, after they had returned to a liberated Copper Ridge, Catherine Moorfield found Ezra sitting alone on the porch of the doctor's office. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice filled with a gratitude so profound it was humbling. "There are no words in the English language to thank you for what you've done. You saved her life. You gave her father justice." "I just did what was right," Ezra said quietly. "You did more than that," she insisted. Judge Morrison explained the legal situation. "The claim her father discovered, the one Croft murdered him for, is legally hers. My granddaughter is now. Well, she's an heiress. She will never want for anything." Ezra nodded. "That's good. She deserves that." "I want to take her home, Mr. Whitmore," Catherine said gently. "Back to St. Louis. I have a large house. She can have the finest tutors, the best education, a life of comfort and safety, a life of civilization." This was it. The moment he had been dreading. He had known it was coming. It was the right thing, the logical thing. A dusty, broken-down ex-ranger had no business raising a wealthy heiress. He looked at the ground, his heart feeling like a lead weight in his chest. "She should go with you," he said, the words tasting like ash. "It's what's best for her." "Is it?" Catherine asked softly. Ezra looked up, confused. "I have been watching you two," she continued. "I see the way she looks at you. You are not just the man who saved her, Mr. Whitmore. In her heart, you are her father." She paused, her green eyes searching his. "I can give her wealth. I can give her education, but I cannot give her back the father she lost. You, however, you have already done that. I am not here to take her away from you. I am here to join her family, your family, if you'll have me." Ezra was speechless. "Evie needs a home," Catherine said. "She needs stability, and she needs her papa. I propose we use the money from her father's mine to build that home. Right here, a ranch, a place where she can grow up safe and loved by both of us." At that moment, the door opened and Evie ran out. She didn't go to her newfound wealthy grandmother. She ran straight to Ezra and threw her arms around his legs. "Papa?" she said, looking up at him, her eyes shining. Grandmother says we can get a horse, a white one. Can we? Please? Papa. She had called him Papa. Ezra looked down at the little girl clinging to him, then at the elegant, strong woman smiling at them both through her tears. The gnawing emptiness he had carried inside him for 2 long years was gone. It had been filled, overflowing, with a love so fierce and powerful it felt like the sun. He scooped Evie into his arms, his throat tight with emotion. I think, he said, his voice thick, we can get any color horse you want, little darling. 2 years later, the sun was setting over a sprawling ranch nestled in a valley just outside of Copper Ridge. The Double W, they called it. The Whitmore Ranch. A 12-year-old Evie helped Ezra finish the evening chores, her laughter echoing in the crisp air. She had grown into a confident, bright young woman, her past a distant shadow, but the lessons it taught, of resilience and compassion, were etched into her soul. Grandmother Catherine was a constant, joyous presence in their lives, spending long months at the ranch and writing letters filled with love and stories from St. Louis. She had ensured Evie's future was secure, but she had wisely let Ezra build their life. They sat together on the porch swing of the handsome ranch house they had built with their own hands, watching the first stars begin to prick the velvet sky. Papa, Evie said, her head resting on his shoulder. What is it, darling? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me that day? Ezra looked out at the vast, peaceful landscape. He thought of the man he had been, a ghost, drifting through life with no purpose. And he thought of the man he was now, a father, a rancher, a man whose heart was whole again. I try not to, he said truthfully. It's too terrible to imagine. I think about it sometimes, Evie said quietly. And I think maybe it was destiny. Maybe Mama and your Ruth and Mercy, they arranged it all from heaven. They knew we both needed saving. Ezra pulled her closer, the familiar weight of her against his side, the most comforting feeling in the world. Maybe they did, he agreed, but I know this for sure. Finding you, Evie. It saved me just as much as I saved you. She snuggled against him, secure in a love that had been forged in the desert, tested by fire and proven unbreakable. I love you, Papa, she said sleepily. I love you too, little darling, he whispered back, more than all the stars in the sky. The man who had lost everything had found it all again in the heart of a little girl who had been left for dead. Their story wasn't one of tragedy, but of triumph. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as our deepest wounds. And that family isn't just about the blood you share, but about the people who show up when the world has cast you out. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of justice and redemption from the forgotten corners of history.